engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Here we are with another episode of the Pure Reinvention podcast, where we've created a support group and a community of people traveling through the journey of reinvention. Today, we are listening to an interview with Julie Novak from the Michigan State Medical Society. She's their CEO, and in the past nearly decade that she's taken the helm there, has experienced a lot of change. Mike, why don't you chime in and explain why we decided that Julie was an important person to interview?
Well, Julie is a phenomenal individual. She's a phenomenal executive, first of all, Misty. She is somebody that I think embodies what the future of chief executive officers will need to behave like. The first thing that really has always impressed me about Julie is her professional curiosity. Julie never comes to the table with the answer. She's always ready to listen to the perspective of others. Julie's been participating in some of our CEO circles for a number of years, rarely misses one, always contributes. And I think that's because she has a real passion to do her job to the best of her ability, realizing that her best work is yet to come.
I think that comes through in the interview. I think that she's really knowledgeable and probably does have a lot of answers if you push her to create those answers. But something I really admire and respect out of her is that open-mindedness to seek different solutions and kind of go through the discovery process, even when you kind of think you know. You'll never really know what you don't know until you go through that discovery process.
Julie had shared, I think, towards the end of the interview that the journey of reinvention is truly that. It's a journey, and that we all have to kind of learn and adjust and adapt. I was very impressed with just simple things that she believes very strongly in, like turning off her email on Sunday. Just very simple things that people can take and implement that can make a huge difference. And I think they'll pick up on a lot of the little small things that Julie has to say that will make a huge difference in the deliverables of the chief executive officer.
Oh, that's a perfect place to leave off and let this interview happen, and we'll round back at the end and talk a little more about what we learned.
See you then. On our journey of pure reinvention, we are so pleased today to welcome Julie Novak. Julie is the chief executive officer of the Michigan State Medical Society and is leading her association through a tremendous transition. Julie, welcome to
Thank you very
Pure
much.
Reinvention. Julie, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to be the chief executive officer.
I think my career is a series of happy accidents, and that sort of thing about preparation and opportunity is what gives you a chance or a way to get to success. I sort of fell into association work, and I fell into healthcare association work in particular, but I feel like it's been a really good fit for me throughout my career. I've been here for 25 years. I've been CEO for 7 years. I held a couple of different positions during those early stages, but I was always challenged by the work, the constant evolution of healthcare, the constant evolution of meeting the needs of a membership population. And physicians are very smart and very inspiring people to work with. So I always felt like there was another challenge here. Even when I might not have had a lot of position change or title change, I got to work on really fulfilling projects and do things that made me feel like I was sort of advancing my value in the organization and sort of being intellectually challenged and challenged to grow as a person and as leader as well.
So it's clear that you have felt some ownership of being a part of the Michigan State Medical Society and its journey. Mm-hmm. It seems as though, as I'm going through your most recent magazine, that in the president's message, the headline is honoring the past and looking to the future. Mm-hmm. It seems like a very interesting place that associations are today is how do we honor the past as we know that the future is going to be so very different?
Right. So what I know from not only my colleagues in other state medical societies, but from other associations in general, is that the changes in the world have caused a change in the need for membership to connect to an organization or even feel they need to be members of an organization. And that's certainly true in medicine. There are a lot of ways that they may get their needs met that traditionally would have been met by having to have a statewide association. The irony is we face this sort of change in just the needs of people and how they get services or resources or help, or rather they feel a need to connect as a profession in the year that we are celebrating our 150th
Wow.
anniversary.
That's amazing.
Which is a very cool history. And if you look back at our history, you can see a lot has been accomplished for the common good, not just the physician population, because the physicians came together. So, for example, the Michigan State Medical Society leadership of the day helped create the Department of Public Health,
wow.
which is now Community Health.
Sure.
They did a lot of things over time that really helped reinforce population and health issues beyond their own practices. And the power of those groups coming together and working sort of across the state has solved things for more than just the physicians and their practices. And there's mission to that work. There's mission to supporting the caregivers. And so we want to celebrate our long history, but we are also, continuing to evolve and have become a much more inclusive, diverse organization than we were historically. And we want people to understand that and sort of embrace how we can help the physicians shape the world going forward.
This going forward is a very interesting concept. As I was reading the article that was written by your president, I was struck by, and I really hadn't thought about it this way, but I was struck by the fact that patients now come to their health care with more knowledge, perhaps, than what they would have ever done in the past due to the access to information. So now they may be self-diagnosing and they may be doing all sorts of things, which completely changes the way that a relationship between a provider and a patient may go on. Was that a part of the reason why the association has had to look at its role and say perhaps we have that same changing dynamic going on?
I think that's a little bit of it, because within our physician population now, they are more likely to be integrated into larger groups or in hospital systems. There's been consolidation
huge in
that world,
industry.
as well as you talked about with Spencer a couple of weeks ago. So their reality has changed. And in the time that I have been here, early in my career, I worked on payer issues and legal and regulatory issues. And the amount of sort of regulatory requirements that physician practices are compelled to keep up with is exponential in the last 20 years. And so and then the pace of sort of medical technology and treatment options and things they can do for patients is also exponential. So everything that they have to absorb to do good by their patients and to run their businesses has gotten more complex and has more sort of input from other people who may or may not understand their particular care process. So they have to really sort of continue to learn in all these different fronts and manage a much faster workflow. And that's a challenge for them. And so part of our job is to help them shape that better going into the future so that it works for them and works for their patients. And we also have to help them get out of their bunker a little bit, because right now I think they're weary and they're a little besieged, particularly those that have been in practice for many years. I think those that are coming out and are younger in practice kind of accept the way the world is. They know it's different and they're embracing those changes a little differently. If you're, well into your 50s and you're not close to retirement yet, this is a lot different than the way you started practice. And so that creates some weariness and some frustration. And our job is to help them manage that and to help shape it for the future generation so it works even better for them with their different expectations.
So as you look at the association now moving into some new responsibilities, some new ways to serve their members, in a sense reinventing itself so that you have a broader member value. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in this process where, as you go through a transition, you talk about some groups not quite embracing the amount of change as fast as others. How do you as the association leader bring all of those things together to provide kind of a look to the future where you are sustainable and valuable and have a reason for belonging?
Well, I think some of what I use to sort of manage that is partly my own sort of personality or disposition. I love to learn new things. I love to be challenged. I love to dig into something. I like being connected to the big idea. Even when I was just a beginner in this organization and didn't have a lot of responsibility, my ability to see myself connecting to something that was bigger than my particular task always inspired me. I don't know that everybody is wired that way, but I think if you're in association work or if you're attracted to an association as a leader in that profession, you probably are. You want to do something for more than just your particular venue. You want to have an impact.
So it starts with you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this was not something I ever expected to do. Not something I probably would have laughed if somebody had told me 20 years ago that this is, the position I would be in. But in some sense, the more I've learned about myself, the more I've worked with an executive coach, which I highly recommend to people, to kind of understand my own strengths and challenges and how I can use those in companionship with the strengths of my colleagues here in the organization and my leaders. I feel like I was supposed to do this in some way. Like, this is a role that I understand I can have some impact on. It's hard work. It's scary. I have to get out of my boundaries all the time. But that's caused me to grow as a person, and I need that too. I would be bored if I were doing the same thing all of the time. The other thing that I think influenced that is my recognition of where I am in sort of the demographic span. I am the very end of boomers, and I'm not really like the boomers, and I'm not really like the people that came just beyond me, but I've always had this sense in the beginning of taking over as CEO, certainly, that my job was to help span the different needs of the generations on either side of me. And that's clearly exhibited in our physician population, how over 45 views the world and their issues are very different than 45, and we have to be relevant to both and to serve the needs of both. And it was my understanding coming into this job that I have now that I was going to be responsible for helping guide the organization through a big transition, old model to new model.
You mean when you were recruited to this position, that was actually said to you?
No, I knew it.
Oh, you knew that.
I said it to them.
You said it to them.
I told the search committee that I knew my job was to help this organization through a big transition and a big shift.
So even before you were hired, you were setting the stage.
I mean, I've been here in the organization, but in this role, yeah, that was my expectation. Now, 7 years later, this acceleration of that shift has been beyond my imagination. I mean, that was an understatement of a lifetime. But I knew that going in, and I sort of embraced that. And I was dedicated to the organization. I was dedicated to the profession that we serve in a way that I felt like I really need to try this. I really need to figure this out. I need to develop new tools to do this because I think this work is important, because I think in a democracy, every voice or every profession needs a voice. And that is part of the way good decisions get made sort of for society as a whole. And so my role is to make sure that this voice continues into the future in a productive way.
You made an interesting comment when you said, I have to figure this out. Mm-hmm. Now that almost suggests that unlike a lot of management of the past where we could either benchmark or we were using best practices, mm-hmm. that we've entered this phase where we're calling it reinvention, but we're entering this phase where there isn't such a roadmap. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on this thought process that a leader has to have to figure it out?
Well, I think some of it is really embracing the signals that your organization is sending you. For a number of years, we've known that we were sort of challenged to stay in the same model that we were in before. And I'm a sort of data-driven person. I like to kind of understand the facts, and then I like to learn new ideas about things. And my CFO put together a spreadsheet for me. And early in my career, I translated, sort of baseball statistic data, not, highly calculated research data, into things that the physicians or the organization could understand. That was one of the things I did early in my career here. And I used that spreadsheet to literally draw a picture for the staff, for myself, first of all. This is what I felt was going on. It showed it.
The data showed it.
Yeah, you could see it in pictures in the graphs from the data. So I drew that picture for myself, and that helped me convey the reality of this wasn't a 3 or 4 year trend. This was a 20 or 30 year trend that we had found different strategies to bridge around. Now we need a more fundamental change in structure and strategy to really go into the future. And I was able to use those pictures to tell that story to staff, to partner colleagues, and to our leadership, so that they were ready to embrace taking on reinvention and change, looking at governance, all those hard things that you need to do to recreate an organization for the future. So it started with the understanding it and then being able to tell the story.
You almost get the impression you view that part of your role is as a translator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Sometimes I'm translating for myself first.
Sure.
Because once I really can embrace and understand it, I feel like then I can not only explain it to others, but then I can start to pull apart the pieces of how do you get to what's next. Because it's not a roadmap, as you said. It's complex. This isn't a specific problem to be solved. This is trade-offs to be considered and sort of new opportunities to be considered. But there's no answer. I'm not driving to Philadelphia. I'm taking a trip of sort of an unknown destination. And you have to have sort of endurance and flexibility. And a phrase that a colleague of mine gave me that he got early in his career when he started in hospital administration was, and work is like that as well. It definitely requires this sort of glass half full, we can do this. You have to, sort of rally your membership. You have to attract your membership. And that's hard work, but you have to be willing to take that on. But you have to also like things that have messy edges and things that aren't simple problems to be solved. And if that's the way you're wired, this work fits for you. If it's not, you probably find something else to do that's a little bit more concrete.
Right, because a lot of people are attracted to straightforward, simple process.
And we need those people,
No, absolutely.
They do things that I can't do.
The role of a translator, I heard, quickly moved into, I had to translate that into a picture.
Mm-hmm.
The picture was where the real value was to me as a leader,
mm-hmm.
to the group of people that I was leading.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a minute about how does one do a picture?
In our case, it was trend data. It was revenue trends. It was membership trends. It was understanding the subcomponents and watching how those things changed over time. And all it really did was articulate what I knew to be true, which was this wasn't a new problem. This was a problem that had been building that we now needed a very different approach to, because we'd had some sort of interim steps to manage it over the last 20 years. And so the things that I learned from the people that preceded me were instructive, but they were in no way the answers that the organization would need and that I would need going forward, because there were some fundamental shifts in the world that had been going on that now really revealed themselves and really sort of came to a head. And that's where the starting place is today, is understanding, in our case, understanding that trend for the long run, to then say, right, okay, we managed that for this period of time. Now we need to really dig down and do the harder work of what does this organization look like and how does it sustain itself for the profession into the future, which is not just sort of patching together the old structure. It's really looking at the structure with a critical eye. And so when I presented that to our leadership, then they said, yes, it's time for us to put a task force together and to really tackle this work. And so we're sort of at the end of the beginning of that process, and now we're getting to the really hard tasks of financial model and governance for the future. So we've done our warm-up, and now we got to run out of the gate and do the long race of the deeper work.
So they say the hardest part of anything is making the decision to do it, and the hardest part of going for a run is getting your shoes on. So if you've done that, right, you instinctively must have known that there was something that needed to be changed. Mm-hmm. You were able to look at the data and not only create a picture that you could understand, but mm-hmm. create a picture that others could understand, and mm-hmm. you have gotten them to understand what you understand, which, by the way, I want you to spend a minute and just talk about, you see this information every day. Your board does not.
Mm-hmm.
How difficult is it for a board to really see what you see on a daily basis when they're not that invested?
Well, we always have to be, that's a good point, because we always have to be sensitive to the fact that this is what we do day to day, and this is volunteer, the work that they do, that is not what they do day to day. And so I think you have to really reinforce the reality to them over time, consistently. You have to kind of tell the story a little bit again and again, not repetitively, but you have to kind of keep reorienting them, because they go back and do their work. You're focused on all of this stuff.
You're the constant.
Yes, and they come back in and they probably remember some of what you said before or some of what they saw or discussed before, but you kind of need to give them sort of a refresher from time to time to keep them focused on their commitment to moving forward, to making change as well, because it's easy to sort of pull back. And when they don't have to focus on it every day, but you need them as leaders to make decisions that, you can only do so much with the organization, with the budget, with the staff, and at some point you're talking about decisions that need the authority of the leadership or the membership. And that's the point that we got to. I did many things to sort of get the organization
to understand.
Into the shape it needed to be today. And I have to say, we have although we have a smaller staff, we have the most dedicated content expert, team player people in my career here. And so you don't have to have a ton of people, but you have to have really
right people.
Good people. Yeah. And the hardship of a stage of contraction is you have to get smaller, but the value of it is you have to really think through, what do we need to do the core things of the mission, and what do we need to do to reinvent the relevance of the mission going forward. And those are the things that you focus on, so you get much more strategic in your choices, and you can't be sloppy about any personnel decisions at all. They're really important because it's the team. It is absolutely the team that will help make this happen.
So in the reinvention process, while you're looking at the marketplace and the membership value, really you also, parallel to that, had to look within your own core business unit and be able to make create these understandings of what was the core values that you had to encourage, and were we competent in those areas. And I mean, that was an interesting thought you just laid out there, that we had to go first.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
what you said.
Well, you have a responsibility, first of all, to live within your budgets and to deliver things that you know need to be delivered. But the next stage beyond that is how does it need to be different? And once you've done that work, then you've built, the credibility that, you're not just asking them to throw more money at a problem, that you've really tried to be concise and focused about the use of resources.
You have made the first move in that. So that's interesting, because one of the first realities to understand in reinvention is you have to go first, and you have to make the initiative to make sure your own scope of span of responsibility is appropriate. Now you're at the point where I think you said our next step is to move into the reality phase of evolving. We've gone through the philosophical understanding of why. Now it comes to what's next in the reality of changing. What do you forecast will be some of the next steps that you will deal with as the association leader in moving the membership to their next reality?
Well, I know that we will need some outside help, not to find the answers, because the answers really have to come from all of us, but to keep us on task and to sort of make sure that we're aware of our blind spots, to know where we have gaps in our understanding, in order to describe the structure of the organization and the method of engaging physicians of the future that we think will be most likely to work. Because again, there's no right answer, but we need someone to keep pushing us forward once we have embraced this idea that we need to do some substantial, meaningful change. There's expertise in everything, and so we need to draw on that expertise to give us structure so that we come up to the hard questions and work through them, rather than face the first hard question and say, we'd have to change something we've always done. We don't feel comfortable with that. Maybe we can jump higher or run faster. And we're past the jump higher or run faster stage.
Right. You've built this momentum now. You want to make sure that whatever barriers, which surely there will be many, are things that you can work through and become better at, as opposed to stopping. You wouldn't want to have all this hard work then be set aside.
Yeah.
Which really leads me to my last question, which is, I think, something that we would both agree, that reinvention is more an attitude and a journey than it is an actual process.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. And that's part of the frustration and challenge of it, and part of the fun of it too. This isn't an end point in my mind. This will be the rest of my career. This will probably be the future for people that do work like this, because the pace of the world just accelerates with every generation. And the fact that, people needed to come to the organization for information or support before was sort of a given. It's not a given anymore. There are many sources, there are many things that do things that they need, and they may think there's something else that's handling all of their needs. I would argue there's still always important value for the profession coming together as a profession, no matter what they're doing, no matter how diverse the settings my physicians are in. I feel like they need a home base, they need a community. They just don't need community with the kind of structure and requirements and participation that we had in the past, because that's the thing that worked in the past. Their needs will be different. We have to shape ourselves to that. And I think that it's important that we do so, because everybody needs a physician. It's sort of a social good that everybody needs at some point. So the more we can help them do their work well, the better we'll all be, in our healthcare and in our wellness and all of that.
Final question. How does the leader really take good care of themselves through this transitional phase and to really be an effective leader of reinvention? What does the leader need to be doing?
So I'm a work in progress on that, I will admit. And one of the things that I have done is reach out and talk to others that have either been through this or are going through this, talking to people that are facing the same things, which is every industry.
Isn't that interesting?
It's not, that was one of the revealing things to me about CEO Circle, is I found out one of my colleagues has specialization problems that peel people off into other organizations too, and I went, oh, I thought it was just healthcare. So I think that makes you realize you're sort of in a shift in history, and that influences the kind of work that you face, and that makes it a little bit easier to deal with. It is hard for all of us to take good care of ourselves intellectually, emotionally, physically, because there's so many inputs. And I've been working on some things, separating myself from technology at times, that feeling that you're sort of on all the time. You have to carve out time for downtime, for rest and reflection.
Did you just say it's almost okay to not look at your email or to turn your phone off?
It's actually important to do so. I know we all need to practice what we preach now. I actually got in the habit of turning my work email off on Sunday, so that if I looked at my phone for other purposes, that I would have that moment of I'm not doing brain surgery on Monday morning. There's nothing that couldn't wait until Monday morning. And I just found that if I couldn't discipline myself to not look through it, if I just turned it off temporarily and then turned it back on either before I went to bed or when I got up in the morning, and really when I get up in the morning is better, because there's nothing you can do at 11 o'clock on Sunday night about an issue that somebody's presented. Right. That immediacy of the electronic, that expectation that you get a response, triggers us all. And I think in order to really create change, to be the kind of leader that we need to be in the future, we need that time for reflection and for just sort of rest as well. Reflection about the work, but then just rest from the work at times. And so I'm going to continue to work on improving that.
I think reinvention does demand for all of us to be the best that we can be.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, thank you very much. This has been a phenomenal conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
That was a really interesting interview. And right there at the end where she was talking about taking the time to reflect, that's something that maybe we don't take the time to pause and talk about enough, because without creating that space where it's just open time, when you kind of not turn off your brain, but stop engaging at such a heavy level where you can't get the new ideas, it's such a nice thought process. I
think what Julie has reminded us of as high performers, no matter what area we're performing in, high performers exert a lot of energy. And since high performers do exert that high degree of energy, we are responsible to rest and to recharge. And we sometimes don't think about the role of leadership and how much it takes out of us. And Julie has reminded us how important it is to take the time to rest, recharge, rejuvenate. And the thing that probably impressed me the most about that comment that she made was, and I'm still working on that. Because I think we have a tendency to just kind of power on.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a constant reminder, and I think for leaders, it's a forever constant reminder to keep working on things like that.
And we have talked about this day and age of being so connected and so in touch with technology that your email's on all the time. So she has intentionally turned off that work email on Sunday because it can wait, and now she has that pause in her life.
You know, we talk about how overwhelming and powerful the internet age is, and having this information constantly streaming at us all the time. And we have to remember that kind of eats up our bandwidth. And as it eats up our bandwidth, we have to start thinking about protecting our bandwidth, because the information alone will just overwhelm us. Let alone, as a leader, right, we need to process it. We need to understand it. Julie also talked about how important her role was to translate that.
I was just going to bring that up exactly. She talked about an executive as a translator being a key function for them, between translating to the staff, translating to the board, and vice versa.
And I believe that she said the reason that was an important role for the leader was because the board comes in on a part-time basis, and they're engaged while they're there, but they're not necessarily always as engaged when they're not there. And that's reasonable for a board of director. But what's really important is for the executive to be that constant translator, that constant communicator, to know there's a certain amount of bandwidth, to make sure that you're putting the correct information translated down that bandwidth to make the best use of your board.
I was really happy to hear her bring up that point, because she's right on. And it's a good reminder for us all that the board does need occasional reminders to keep them on track. Okay, they're shifting gears when they come to sit at that meeting or check those emails, and being that translator for them to keep them on track, gently remind them what we're talking about, why it's important, and why they're really there is key.
Michigan State Medical Society has a huge, long, rich history. And given that very lengthy history of success, one of the things that Julie knows is that there's an important transition taking place, not only within the profession that they serve, but within the association industry as well. And she has fully embraced her role as an executive in helping to make sure that the next 150 years for the Michigan State Medical Society will be just as successful as the first 150.
I think she brought up a good point too. What she's learning from her members there's a lot of physicians that she needs to get them out of the bunker. I think I'm trying to remember her exact phrase, but it was something like that. And the board is the same way, and we all are in our way. We're in our bunker, we're doing our job, and we talked to other people that are reminded of this too, to step back and don't be so in your bunker or so in your head that you're not open to change in climate of your industry, change in needs. Julie reminded us to embrace the signals that you're getting from your industry and from your members, and these are such important things you can't do if you're in your bunker or with your head down.
No, I think that's exactly right, Misty, that the tendency we all have is to kind of silo ourselves into our own little world.
It's easy, it's effective, you've got a lot to do.
And you know what? It's a protection. With so much stuff coming at us, if we can kind of silo and wall some of this stuff away, it kind of protects some of our bandwidth. But the reality is, for a leader, whether it's in Julie's role as the leader of the association, whether it's the director's role in leading the organization as well, if you don't cross-understand what's happening in all of these worlds that coexist together, you really can't then lead and cross-pollinate and generate new opportunities. That siloing does not allow for that. And so it is difficult, but it is absolutely imperative to encourage and enrich ways in which people can cross-function, cross-understand, and ultimately that leads to a much higher level of understanding and accomplishment.
I completely agree. I think there's a lot of leaders out there that are going through that same problem, and Julie touched on that too, where, industry-wide association executives and key leaders are still a network that can reach out to each other and share these ideas and best practices, no matter if they're serving different associations.
Julie has been probably the poster child or the poster executive for embracing what you don't know and being on a constant journey of trying to understand how what you don't know can be incorporated in with what you do know, so you can be the most effective leader that you can be.
I think many of us could benefit from learning that example and living that example. If you have any feedback you want to share with us about learning and living reinvention, share it with us on Twitter or Facebook at Pure Reinvention. And you can also email us, info@purereinvention.com. We would love to hear your stories and your ideas. Remember, if you're ready to make a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.